Good evening and welcome to the Latino History Project of Worcester Historical Museum's virtual event titled Policing and Race in Worcester, the story of Cristino Hernandez. I am Maritza Cruz, one of the founders of the Worcester Latino History Project. Tonight's program is possible with signature support from a major grant from National Endowment for the Humanities, Exploring the Human Endeavor. Worcester Together funds a joint effort between the Greater Worcester Community Foundation and the United Way of Central Massachusetts in partnership with the City of Worcester. Mass Humanities, which provided funding through the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH, as part of the Federal CARES Act legislation. This program is brought to you by the Latino History Project of Worcester in partnership with the College of the Holy Cross Scholarship in Action Program and Worcester Historical Museum. Tonight we will examine the 1993 case of Cristino Hernandez, who died at the hands of Worcester Police. Hernandez, a Salvadorian immigrant, was arrested by two police officers and severely beaten in July 1993. According to accounts in the Worcester Telegram and Gazette and the Los Angeles Times, he died of his injuries 10 days later. A portion of the incident was captured on video, sparking comparisons to the infamous Rodney King tape. This is a 20-year history that the community carries within us. We will revisit this tragedy and present facts based on historical research. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you to our panelists for agreeing to look back on this tragedy with us. It would be remiss of me to state that this tragic incident is not only a story of Latinos in Worcester, it is a story that impacted all of us who came together as Latinos, as whites, as Blacks, Asians, young and old. We came together in a collective and outrage to protest and to mourn. It is a story of our city, and thus it is a history of Worcester. Tonight's moderator is Professor Aldo Garcia Guevara, Professor of History at Worcester State University, and one of our researchers for the Latino History Project of Worcester. Aldo?
Good evening. Aldo Garcia Guevara, Professor of History at Worcester State. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on indigenous lands of the Nipmuc Nation here in Worcester, and to recognize the indigenous peoples who have lived and continue to live here. As I awoke to the shooting of Jacob Blake after the recent killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I was reminded, although I didn't need a reminder, that a discussion that helps us understand these tragedies is necessary and salient as ever. I won't say more than ever, because as a historian, I know it's not true. And as someone who was a college student, when the acquittal of the officers who beat Rodney King sparked nationwide protests, I know unfortunately these stories have been with us for a very long time. Unlike many of those terrible events, for many here it was personal. It happened here in Worcester to a Salvadoran man, and we have a panel of people who were intimately involved with Cristino Hernandez, members of his family who can speak to the tragic events of that morning, but also about his life. Those who represented him while he struggled with social and healthcare systems, who represented his family after his death, who can speak from personal experience to the challenges of the systems he faced and the problems we live with today. So thank you for the panelists for being here today. Many people may not be familiar with these events. I myself only learned about this event last semester. I'll read a piece prepared by Dr. Stone and Porche of Holy Cross, primarily on Worcester Telegram and Gazette newspaper reports. It'll take a few minutes, but bear with me. We felt it was important to give a more complete narrative before the discussion. Early on the morning of July 6, 1993, police officers arrived at the Worcester, Massachusetts home of 38-year-old Cristino Hernandez after receiving a disturbance complaint against a man looking into neighbor's first floor window and tapping on the screen. After an initial call in which Hernandez fled back into his home, the officers, David Reedy and Christopher McGinnis, returned to find him in the bushes. According to their reports, Hernandez struck them with a plastic tube before running out to his Clarkston Street house with Reedy in pursuit. Accounts of what followed differ dramatically, but videotape of the final moments of the ensuing arrest show that 225-pound Reedy pressing his knees onto the 145-pound Hernandez's lower and upper back near his neck as they attempted to cuff his hands and feet. Officers restrained him on his abdomen for a total of 4 minutes and 5 seconds, the final 3 of which Hernandez remained motionless.
You guys are gonna be in big trouble.
You're gonna be next.
Oh, you think?
Hernandez's sisters, Noelia Chafoya and Paola Rolon, and mother, Elisa Quintanilla, can be heard shouting at the officers. Chafoya and Rolon were subsequently arrested for disorderly conduct after 2 additional officers, Robert Lamprey and William Chanis, arrived. Lamprey called for an ambulance after being concerned that Hernandez's breathing had become, quote unquote, very shallow. Paramedics arrived to find him in cardiac arrest. Despite police reports that Hernandez had hit his head on a stairway post while resisting arrest, subsequent medical report indicated the victim had suffered brain damage as a result of oxygen deprivation. After falling into a coma, Hernandez died at St. Vincent's Hospital on July 16th. A subsequent medical examiner's report declared that his death resulted from swelling of the brain, quote, due to respiratory compromise during physical restraint. More than 400 people attended the wake at Centro Las Americas, with 60 people accompanying the casket bearing Hernandez's body from Centro to St. Paul's Cathedral. In the ensuing investigations, competing portraits of Hernandez and the incident emerged. Friends, family, neighbors mourned a quiet family man, a loving uncle who enjoyed tending his garden, watching pickup soccer games on Grove Street, working 2 jobs to save up for his relatives to live together in one house. His passion for gardening grew from his upbringing in Cuisnahuat, a small farming village in El Salvador. The nation's decade-long civil war would force many to flee to the United States, creating tight-knit communities throughout the country, including a Worcester community of nearly 1,400 by 1993. By comparison, there's over 4,000 Salvadorans in Worcester today, 60,000 in the state of Mass. Hernandez himself emigrated in 1989 while continuing to send money and clothing to friends and family in his beloved country. But the trauma of the Salvadoran conflict, uniformed soldiers terrorizing the countryside, had created a deathly fear of police officers. And this was heightened by a developing mental disorder. A friend who grew up with him in El Salvador, Gilberto Alvarenga, said he had a problem in his mind, but he didn't deserve to die for it. Hernandez's mental illness remains central to the image offered by authorities and the justice system. Before the July 6th events, in which neighbors found him swinging a golf bag and a toy gun in their front yard, he'd been arrested twice before. The first was for a kidnapping while riding in a car with friends who picked up a female passenger. They attempted to drive to New York City after promising to take her home. The second arrest resulted from an alleged assault and battery on a police officer who found him locked in a bathroom stall while visiting a nursing home where his sister worked. Both charges were dropped, but not before the court sent him to Bridgewater State Hospital, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 1992. Although his status should have been reviewed after 30 days, he remained there for 8 months, pleading for his release through his attorney, Margaret Guzman. Dramatic discrepancies between the police report and the family witnesses who videotaped the arrest led the family to demand an independent investigation. Attorney Hector Piñero declared, "The issues are, first, did the police use excessive force, as the family suggests they did? And secondly, was there a delay in providing medical attention?" The judge at the inquest deemed that there was use of excessive force, but cleared both police officers of criminal wrongdoing. The report stated that officers, quote, acted in good faith, end quote, while also noting that the officers, quote, used more force than was reasonable or necessary under the circumstances. An internal police investigation had claimed that Hernandez died of other factors, similar to the argument put forward in the immediate aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. Both officers who had been placed on paid leave were reinstated. As the family prepared a civil lawsuit, Elisa Quintanilla sent a letter to President Bill Clinton, along with a video recording of the last minute of her son's life. "I don't want another mother to go through what I went through," she said. In their civil lawsuit, they declared that the Worcester Police Department, quote, had a custom and practice of arresting, punishing, and beating Hispanic Americans and members of other racial and ethnic minorities more severely than other citizens, end quote. Hearings into Hernandez's death drew protests from numerous organizations demanding the dismissal of all the officers. The Justice for Cristino Hernandez Committee declared that failure to do so cheapens all of our lives, especially the lives of people of color. Cristino Hernandez's death made national news while drawing comparisons to the 1991 police beating of Rodney King, that at that time raised issues of racial bias in policing. However, as the Associated Press described in 1994, the Hernandez tape prompted no national outcry and, quote, lacked the jolting images of the King tape. But the most obvious difference was the most tragic for attorney Hector Piñero, quoted in the Los Angeles Times. King was able to live and tell about his brutal beating, and Hernandez was not. I'm a relative latecomer to the Latino History Project, but I want to stress that our mission is to, alongside the community, to tell many stories of Latinos in Worcester. Somos Worcester. There's no story of Worcester without the stories of Latinos, and this is one of them. So I'd like to turn to the panelists. Reminding everyone that unfortunately we're on a strict timetable, and I'll ask folks to cut their responses short if you go on. It's part of a larger conversation, and that doesn't end here tonight. Not only does this group have much more to say that you will not be able to say tonight, there are also many others who also want their voices heard and will in the future. So please, a reminder to introduce yourself before answering the questions. And I'll begin with Paola. So Paola, can you tell us your relationship to Cristino, and then what you saw, what you witnessed the morning of July 6, 1993?
Mi nombre es Paula. Bueno, en ese tiempo era Rolón, ahorita soy Jake, soy una de las hermanas de Wilfredo, Cristino. Y yo estuve en ese día con lo que pasó, yo fui la que grabé el video. Y ahorita aquí estoy con mi familia, con mi mamá, mis hermanas y mi sobrino. Y para mí es un poco difícil, la verdad, hablar de eso, de esto. A la vez, como les digo, uno nunca se le olvida lo que uno vive. Uno aprende a vivir con el dolor. Ya han pasado ya más de, creo ya 25, 26 años, 25 creo, o 27, pero que sigue el dolor, los recuerdos, y con todo esto que está pasando, duele más. Y quizás la forma que este otro Floyd murió, es como que yo hasta la vez ni he podido ni ver bien el video, porque me recordé mucho de las palabras de mi hermano en ese momento, que fueron las mismas palabras que él dijo que ya no podía respirar, y eso fue las últimas palabras que escuché de mi hermano. Y como que vuelve a uno a revivir ese momento, aunque uno trata de vivir quizás con eso en la mente, pero uno sigue, como que trata de uno de seguir la vida, pero cuando vienen cosas así otra vez, como que se vuelve a revivir la herida. Y les puedo hablar que quizás para mí, les voy a hablar de mi persona, como que en lo de mi hermano no se hizo justicia. Los policías siguen como que si nada pasó. Les puedo traer una anécdota que me pasó hace como en 2011. Me volví a topar a uno de los policías frente a frente. Y yo en el tiempo, en el 93, yo no pude llorar a mi hermano. Yo no pude como sacarme el dolor que sentía, porque quizás por toda la situación que pasó, que tuve que entrevistas, manifestaciones y todo eso. Y como les digo yo, ahorita eso está, entiende, en ese momento yo no pude vivirlo, 11 años atrás lo viví. Viví la muerte de mi hermano en el 2011. La verdad fue como un déjà vu otra vez para mí. Gracias a Dios en ese momento no pasó de una muerte, pero tuve a ese policía enfrente de mí otra vez. Y como que quizás, como yo digo, que quizás hasta que yo me muera voy a acabar con este dolor. Y son quizás cosas que Yo sabía que algún día me iba a pasar, lo he visto en la calle, lo he visto, pero nunca me lo había topado de frente a frente. Y quizás esas son de una de las razones que pienso que quizás por eso lo que pasó con mi hermano no hubo justicia, porque ellos siguen como que si nada pasó. Allá al ladito mío pueden ver a mi mamá. Yo sé que a ella todo lo que después de todo lo que pasó con mi hermano, ahí como la ven, esa señora siempre fue una señora fuerte. Yo nunca había visto llorar a mi mamá. Yo siempre tenía el orgullo de verla a ella, que fue una señora soltera, creó a 8 hijos ella sola. Y nunca la había visto sufrir como sufrió después de que mi hermano murió, el momento que cuando mi hermano murió. Y después de eso, ella le dio un stroke y ahí la ven todavía. Sigue luchando, no se le olvida, porque perdió el habla. Ella no habla desde que le dio el stroke. Pero ese día que pasa eso, el aniversario de mi hermano, a ella no se le olvida. Aunque ella no nos puede decir, llévenme al cementerio, o ella no nos puede decir, es el aniversario de tu hermano, pero a gestos y a su manera, ella sabe que es ese día. El otro día estaba aquí con mi hermana y ella dice, quizás ella se acordará de eso. Y yo les digo, sí, ella se acuerda. Yo sé que se acuerda de esos días. Y yo sé que para ella es difícil, que nunca se le va a olvidar eso. Donde mi hermano está enterrado es en la Hope Cemetery. Allí yo trato de evitarlo, no porque me trae recuerdos y siempre como que me gusta. Cada vez que paso por ahí, como que tengo que ir allí. Tengo que ir al cementerio, tengo que ver el cementerio, tengo que ver su tumba. Mi madre me hace lo mismo. Cuando pasamos por allí, yo voy con ella a veces, ella lo que ha seguido me señala el cementerio o me jala el timón para que la lleve allí. Para el viernes estaba en el hospital, un cuento, y salimos del hospital y pasando por ahí, a mí cuando ando con ella no me gusta pasar, como le digo, por allí, porque yo sé que ella se recuerda. Saliendo del cementerio me jala para allí, del hospital me jala para allí, vio y ya ella lo vio y se como que se alegra al ir y al mismo tiempo yo sé que es el dolor que siente.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you. She talked about how, when in 1993, when these events happened and she bore witness to them, that at that time she was not able to mourn, and that she had an encounter with one of the police officers in 2011. She came face to face with him, and in that moment, everything came back, and she relived that moment. Glad that no incident came of it. But in that moment, she felt that there wasn't justice, that justice wasn't served for the family, for Cristino in that moment, as the police officers continued their lives, but the family has forever been affected. She shared, about her mother. Her mother was very strong and has suffered a stroke, and so she's lost her ability to speak. But she knows, and in different ways, that she can communicate, that she will never forget, and told the story of going by Hope Cemetery, where Cristino is buried, and her asking Paola to take her there. She began, though, with a very sort of powerful statement that the last words that she heard Cristino speak was, "Yo no puedo respirar," I can't breathe. Paola, ¿algo más en este momento?
I just want to say thank you for what you guys doing. I will never think that what happened to my brother is gonna come back or anybody gonna speak about it. And I'm really glad and thank you to you guys for doing this for the family. I appreciate it really, really much, speaking for me, that you guys doing that.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. So Paola talked a bit about how this event has changed the lives of your family. Can you talk about that as well? How this has affected your family and how you've responded to the tragedy? Remember, just quickly introduce yourself and then answer the question.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to the Latino History Project for hosting this event. Thank you to you all who are involved. My name is Ricky Escobar. I'm the nephew of Cristino Hernandez, grandchild of Elisa Quintanilla, whom I have here to my right, nephew of Paula Jakes, nephew of Noelia Tafoya Hernandez, and son of Rubita Hernandez. I want to first say, it was a tragedy what happened to my family. I was not alive to witness this event, but I can tell you that it was a tragedy because I remember being a child having nightmares about this event. And these are nightmares that I had from stories that were told. I can't begin to explain to you guys the nightmare that my family lived actually witnessing this event. But from there, like my aunts and uncles have said, you can only move forward. There's no way else to put it. You can only continue and prosper. And, and that's exactly what we have done. My aunts and uncles are some of the strongest people whom I've met, great role models. We have a huge family. I have numerous of cousins here and in the states of Massachusetts, all over the world, all over. And it's one thing that they've taught us is it's how to continue to progress in life and do better. And I think it was something that was learned because of these tragedies that have happened in our family. And I see it every day in them, When this event came to life, I thought about it, and in the beginning I was not interested in being involved. But I sat there and I pondered it, and I thought it was important for me to jump on board. I thought it was something that had to be done. And I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to be involved, to be able to speak and tell our story. And here we are, we have, we have successful business owners. We have people in professions and all different areas of work. And I see it in us every day where we just continue to prosper, whether this happened to us or it didn't. And here we are, we continue to prosper. And that's what we were taught, this event came to life and we didn't let it take us down. We didn't let it break us. So, that's just kind of some of the events of where we are presently. And that's kind of all I can say on my part. Like I said, I was not alive when these events took place, so I can't even begin to tell you how it went down, what my family felt at the time. But what I could tell you now is that, our family is, to this day, we can definitely tell you that there was no justice. My uncle was killed by the hands of the Worcester police officers, and we can never bring him back to life, and they can pay us whatever money they want to the family, but no justice was found.
Thank you, Rick. I'd like to turn to Margaret, Your Honor. We chatted recently about how all too often our systems fail people who are mentally disabled. A recent report by the Ruderman Family Foundation featured in the Wall Street Journal argues that almost half of the people who die at the hands of police have some kind of disability. As officers are often drawn into emergencies where urgent care may be more appropriate than lethal force. You can tell us what you know about Cristino's engagement with the mental health, penal, and judicial system, and if you can please share your role in these events.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate everyone being on the panel and for all the people participating in this really valid and very timely discussion. Quite frankly, I kept waiting for Cristino's photo to be on the front page of the Worcester paper after the George Floyd. It could not have been more, so many facts in common. So I became involved after he was already at the Bridgewater State Hospital for a very long period of time. A judge received a letter, and that judge called out to me and asked me if I would look into the letter from this man saying he was being held against his will at Bridgewater Hospital. I got the clerk's file. I was in touch with his family, and I went to the Bridgewater and saw him. He indeed had been held months beyond the appropriate time. As it turned out, when he was arrested for it was the mental illness and the lack of English language skills is what really got him behind bars. He was in an innocent situation. He had a crush on someone. They got nervous. They called the hospital police, and they chased him into a bathroom, and he was trying to prevent himself from being arrested, and they charged him with assault and battery on a hospital police officer. When he was brought to court, he couldn't speak English, and he really had developmental delays, and they determined that he needed to be evaluated for competency, and they sent him to Bridgewater for that. But he got lost. No lawyer followed up. He was committed for a 6-month period for a crime that could not have, he could not have faced a maximum penalty of, I think, more than 60 days. It was very minor, the offense. And so he was held for months beyond the time he needed to. And we got him into court the next day. He was released. They eventually dismissed the charges. His story is sad and tragic, but not, unfortunately, unique. The tragic consequence of mental illness or developmental delays and a lack of adequate legal representation, language skills, lack of interpreters at all stages of the proceedings cause many people to be caught in that trap. And he was caught in a trap. And he was one of the, one of the innocents, just innocents. And we see them, I see them in my court. We are, the legacy of Cristino Hernandez, quite frankly, is much greater attention to the circumstances of individuals who are non-English speaking, people who are presenting with mental illness or issues related to competency. There is much more oversight about the length of time, and there are consequences should he be held, a person be held beyond the period in which they legally should be held. So his life, not only is his life to his family not without meaning, but his life and the legacy of how he was treated in the legal system has had a lasting impact to the better. But Aldo, you have raised what is the signature issue, and we are seeing it play out every day. The police are not mental health providers. They don't have the training for it. They don't have the skills, and they don't have the disposition for it. And we are asking them to be the front lines between mental illness and public disruption. And their go-to is aggressive force. They want to quiet the situation. And in many cases, people respond who are suffering from that mental illness respond even worse due to the fear that comes from that aggressiveness coming from law enforcement. So I do know that Worcester Police, they paid a very significant price for, and I don't mean in the money, I mean in the ranks, in the recognition that they were poorly trained to deal with people like Cristino and many others like him, that they had no sensitivity to the language barriers. And that has become an issue that was raised. So no life should be as a martyr. But if a life is lost tragically, as this one was, it was not without positive consequence down the road for other people. He may very well have caused the police to interact with other individuals in a better way, merely because of his own mistreatment. So I still see it, and I remember him. I went to the wake to see the family, and they could not have been more welcoming and lovely, even in spite of the tragedy that they were suffering. So thank you for letting me come back and speak about what was a very memorable case for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Dr. Piñero, I'd like to follow with you. So Hector, you represented the family in the subsequent civil suit. Can you briefly tell us the kind of the process and outcome, and what are the most important things that the public should know?
Well, I agree with the family that no justice was done. And I say that one of the most important things in this case that we have to remember was that the life of, Cristino's death was caught in full color in a videotape that his sister, his younger sister, Noelia Chafoya, had the foresight to pull out at 6:30 in the morning. That video demonstrated in black and white, how the police sucked the last minutes of this guy's life. The medical examiner, the Massachusetts medical examiner, and Dr. Donald Ray, who was the foremost authority on this type of death in the country, explained to the jury during a 14-day trial, which had to be moved because for pretrial publicity, how this guy stopped breathing and how the family insisted on them stopping what they were doing. They knew as lay people, they didn't have medical backgrounds, but they knew that they were hurting his brother. One of the things that was captured in this video is after they put Mr. Hernandez prone on the ground, the police raised his arms while handcuffed almost to, I want to say, not 180 degrees, but it was clearly over 150 degrees. We knew intuitively that that would have caused a tremendous amount of damage. Instead, what did the police do when his family demanded justice, demanded that they stop in medical care? The two sisters got arrested, and another relative came very close from becoming arrested as well. I feel this way almost 20-something years later, that his death was unnecessary, preventable. And I say preventable because the police department received the report that went to the chief of police at that time, Ed Gardella, and to the chief trainer of the police department that there was a risk of placing people in their belly. Police officers received no training in that regard. The other part of this case that I think was important and it's important to mention it today, was what was the response by the police department and by the city. The police department learned, in my view, very little. They had no takeaway from this case. The initial reaction by the city, as it continues to be today, is to insist, before any of the facts were known, that there had been no wrongdoing. I think once this videotape of this man's death emerged, the police saw maybe 20 seconds of it, and they declared victory. And they said that there had been no wrongdoing. Then they said that they were going to do an independent and exhaustive investigation, just like they continue to say today, and they were incapable of doing that because they ignored the findings of a district court judge who was commissioned to do an independent investigation, what they call a judicial inquest. So even when a judge listens to a week of testimony and expert testimony and doctors, he says that there was an excessive use of force. that there was no criminality, even the city ignored those findings. I think it's important also to talk about something very important here, and that's the role of law enforcement and death investigations. I was looking at some figures the other day. We've only had 12 days this year when people have not been killed by the police. And so, you have some people, including good intended people like presidential candidates, that say, well, there's just a few bad apples in police and there's always very good people. But the problem is that slogan doesn't explain why this year only we've gone 12 days where police have not killed a person. This is an epidemic that we're having. It was an epidemic in 1993. It continues to be an epidemic. This is why people have marched, have risked injury to limb and body when they get tear gas, when they get pepper sprayed, when they get hit with plastic bullets, and people have said no more. But let me talk about the intersection between law enforcement and death investigations. Because there's another case, just like Cristino Hernandez, that happened 2.5 years ago that will be exposed very quickly. It's a person that died from the same condition that Cristino died. Cristino died from the restraint and from having weight in the middle of his back. So what did the district attorney do at that time? They put the detectives on the state police to do a thorough investigation. And so I'll never forget, I went to UMass Memorial Medical Center because the state medical examiner at that point had an office there, only to learn that the autopsy of Cristino Hernandez had been completed. And I called the then existing medical examiner, Dr. Joanne Richmond, who testified at his trial. And I said, did you know that there was a videotape of Cristino's death? Because the death had been ruled out to be ischemic anoxic encephalopathy, meaning from the restraint, from the asphyxia, he didn't get enough oxygen in the brain and his heart stopped and he stopped breathing. So she said, no, can you bring the videotape? And I don't think she had all the medical records. Now the state police, the CPAC unit of the state police, have this information available, and they did not share this information with the medical examiner. When the medical examiner, so she had already completed Cristino's autopsy, I asked her to please return to the autopsy room and to open the shoulder muscles. Dr. Richmond testified at trial in 2000 that in her 30 years as a medical examiner, or 20-something years, she had never seen the extensive amount of damage that the police had caused Cristino Hernandez in the muscles of his shoulders, of his upper back, and so forth. So on top of the asphyxia, there was this incredible element of pain and torture that he was subjected to. As I mentioned, the city did what every other city does today. If a mentally ill person dies at the hands of the police, they'll blame a host of factors. They'll say, well, mentally ill people die for no reason at all when they are exposed to police. We have another case 2 or 3 blocks away from here where an individual was acting out at Pennywise, the police tased him, and something else happened and this person died. We have another case in Leominster where police put weight on somebody's back and they killed him, and the medical examiner states that one of the causes of this person's death was a hemorrhage in the spinal cord. What does the state police detectives that worked for the Worcester District Attorney conclude on this case? Case closed, just like they decided in this case that the case was closed. I think that was a turning point, in Cristino's case, because it put in black and white the mechanics of his death. But when then the political response also is important, because the political
Hector, can make a last point. I want to make sure we get time for Joe. So if you could.
Yes, absolutely. So I think no justice was done in this case, and we've learned, police departments have learned very little, and this city has learned very little. The problems are not going to be solved simply by installing body cameras. We need much more serious reform. The serious reforms are not community policing based. Those are the type of things that bring hundreds of resources to deal with issues of poverty in poor urban areas. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Hector. And now, Mr. Hennessy. So, Joe, as a former police officer, what can you tell us about why these incidents often lead to tragedy? And what institutional changes do you believe are necessary?
Well, I can tell you that I read some of the articles from the Telegram. I was really troubled by the internal affairs within a couple days making a ruling that there was no wrongdoing by police officers in this case. The problem that I see is that internal affairs cannot conduct any independent and impartial investigation on any issue. I can tell you that I was a police officer at the time of this incident in a city just outside of Boston. That was in the 1990s. I went to the academy in 1986. I became a police officer in 1984 and retired in 2007. At no time did I receive any training regards to handling of anybody with mental health issues. Never received it. One of the issues that I see is that regarding internal affairs or investigations is that internal affairs has to be removed from any police department. They cannot conduct an impartial investigation. There has to be an independent board. There has to be a citizen board that is formed in every city to investigate these complaints. There has to be some form of identification of troubled officers, and there has to be a treatment program. Officers have to be sent to counseling, or there has to be a remedy, and that would include termination if these officers are receiving multiple complaints. I transferred my office from Boston out to Worcester about 4 years ago, and I have seen nothing but trouble in this city. I have seen multiple complaints. I have seen ignored. Hector and I were involved in a letter that was sent over involving 18 issues. Two of the counts were mine, and nothing's been done. So there has to be a change in the way police handle investigations and how they handle internal affairs and discipline in every police department.
All right, thank you, Joe. We have just a few minutes left. Thank you all the panelists for what you've shared so far. And I'd like to give folks a chance for a last say. So it could be about what's changed since or what hasn't. Just anything that you want to share with the audience before we head out. And so I'd like to turn it over to. I guess Joe and Hector, will you lead us off? Is there anything else quickly that you want to make sure that the audience takes away?
Well, I think we really need serious systemic changes. They need to be at the state level. There has to be, just like there used to be a strong civil rights statute, which has been mired by issues of qualified immunity. We're looking at this legislation in Massachusetts, and it's nibbling at the edges of the problems that we're having. We have very serious problems with issues of police credibility. All you have to look is at what's happened in the city since June with the social protests, where police said that they showed incredible restraint only to show videos that undermine the false police narrative, or a young individual who nearly went to jail for allegedly attempting to assault a police officer, and only to be exonerated because a video of the event existed. So we see a newspaper article today that the officer who was in charge of the canine is no longer a canine officer, but continues to patrol the city. That's a very serious issue. That's an extremely serious concern. Or that his partner, who prepared a false report. And these things happen not isolated. We're not just talking about apples. They happen all the time. It's a ubiquitous problem. We have to put an end to it. We need to see the records of these people. The courts have to play their part, and the district attorney has to do their job as well and expose these people for what they are. Thank you.
Aldo, I just wanted to say the emphasis on mental health treatment and the access to medical care and bringing these issues before the city council so that there is a step that goes before when there's a call involving someone. These are tragic things that can be, I understand Hector's perspective, but I also think there's a way that we can reach out to people who are in those situations before we bring the police in. So I just think that's one of the things that we can really push the city council as far as taking up as an issue.
I'd like to say something here. One of the things in listening to, the family of Cristino Hernandez speak, and for me, it's very powerful and emotional to see his family sitting here. And something that Paola said, that when she heard the last words that her brother said, no puedo respirar, I can't breathe. These are the words that we keep hearing over and over again all over this nation when it comes to the murders, and predominantly of, Black Americans and Latino Americans. And so one of the things we have to acknowledge here in telling this story, that it is not a Latino story only, it's a story of Worcester, but it is also a story that's telling what's happening and has been happening in our nation for decades. And we have to look at the systemic racism and the institutional racism and the structural racism that we find in all our institutions within law enforcement. And that's, and in schools and so on. And so we have to address that, and we have to acknowledge that, because Cristino Hernandez did not get any justice because his life didn't value as much. He was just a brown Latino immigrant. And so his life was not as valuable. And so I think that it's important to state that in presenting this, we're not, we also have to look at that. Yes, we have to look at mental health issues. And yes, we have to look at how we treat, but you know what? We have to also look at all the racial biases that law enforcement needs to be made aware of. And there has to be workshops, and there has to be something when a police officer is being trained to be a police officer, along with the mental health issues that they need to, they're expected to be social workers also, but we have to acknowledge that there is also racial bias, and we have to address the issue of systemic racism, institutional racism, along with addressing the issues of those other inequities that we have not been dealing with very good.
Thank you, Maritza. Okay. Rick, Paola, do you want to share something at the end?
Yeah, again, we just want to thank all the panelists. We want to thank the Latino History Project, again, for giving us the opportunity to speak on this event, share a little insight on our perspectives. And, we can't make this change unless we change ourselves, meaning we have to do better as a community. We have to do better as family. We have to do better as those who serve to protect. Again, my family has taught, you know, they never try to instill in my head, hey, look down upon police officers, they murdered your uncle. No, never. We have the ultimate respect. Speaking for myself, I have the ultimate respect for authority. We can't let this happen anymore. We can't continue to kill our own people. And that's it. Again, we'd just like to thank you all for the opportunity.
Same with me. I would just appreciate what you guys doing for us as a family. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And for the rest of the family, like you want to see, there they are. And really thank you. That's my sisters. And thank you.
It's the woman herself.
And that's my mom. And this is something that she carried all the since that day happened. All right, mommy.
She has a necklace with the pendant of my uncle's face on it, which she has
never
on.
taken it out. She doesn't let anybody touch it. Something that she always keep next to her heart. Broken heart, I should have said. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know how difficult this must be. Thank you for sharing. So as I mentioned earlier, Latino History Project of Worcester has been collecting stories and artifacts from the people of Worcester. So we're telling these stories, right? Not the story, but many stories of Latinos in our great city. Our goal is to complete a major exhibit at the Worcester Historical Museum late in 2021, which I understand will have a presence of the museum in 2022 and beyond. To close the program and tell us a little bit more about that, please welcome David Connor, Director of Community Engagement at the Worcester Historical Museum.
Thank you very much, Aldo. Hello, everyone. As Dr. Guevara Garcia said, my name is David Connor. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at Worcester Historical Museum, as well as one of the steering committee members of the Latino History Project of Worcester. We just wanted to thank you for attending tonight's presentation, and thank you to our panelists for revisiting this history with us once again. On behalf of the Latino History Project of Worcester, we wanted to dedicate tonight's event, tonight's conversation to Cristino Hernandez, to his family, and to all of those impacted by police violence here in the United States, as well as in Worcester. As we connect the past with the present and reconstruct our future, today's national movement demands an end to state-sponsored violence. So will American society adhere to those demands? That's the questions that we are asking ourselves. Where will Worcester's history fit into this question? If we're looking forward 100 years from now, how did Worcester respond to this? How will history write Worcester's response to this question? The role of Worcester Historical Museum is to share the stories of Worcester's past to help understand the present and to shape the collective future. Thank you for keeping Worcester's history alive today and for future generations. When we think about history, we must ask ourselves, whose version of history is able to be written and studied, and why? What are the connections between historical representation and power in the United States, as well as here in Worcester? Maritza, at the beginning of this conversation, mentioned that history has a way of repeating itself. Worcester Historical Museum's responsibility is to share the past. The question for all of us tonight and tomorrow is, how do we together apply the lessons of the past to shape a safe, nonviolent, socially just, and equitable tomorrow's America and Worcester? One more time, I wanted to thank everybody and thank our sponsors, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Worcester Together Fund, Mass Humanities, and also we had some support from the College of the Holy Cross Scholarship and Action Grant, sponsored by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Mass Cultural Council. If you want to know more about the work that we do here at Worcester Historical Museum with our Latino History Project, with collecting Worcester's history in general, You can find us on Facebook at Worcester History, on Instagram at Worcester Historical Museum. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful night.